when they did get to a certain level of project, there is a pipeline that is, this is how you do it if you're working with people, and so it's good to practice this. But then there's also, are you actually going to do it if you have to do it that way? Because I think fun in a project is an underrated thing.
G'day, welcome to the GitGud.CG podcast. This is the podcast where two CG artists document their journey of getting good. Along the way, we'll be sharing some knowledge that you can use in your journey of getting good as a CG artist as well. My name's Jayden, and this is Kris.
Hi.
How's it going, Kris?
What goes? What is going? How go? What do?
Well, lockdown is what do.
Well, yeah, but we've started every podcast that way so far, so I just thought I'd start with a collection of rambling words that nobody can decipher.
Yeah, nice, man. Nice.
You're welcome.
So what have you been up to in this fine day of lockdown?
Oh, just getting through it. I've really got nothing much else to do but sort of work on my work. What did you call it the other time? The hyperbolic time loop, where the only things that are important are the things that we give importance to?
Yeah, pretty much. The lockdown in my city just got extended by another month, and everyone else collectively is just like, no. And I'm sitting here being like, yes, more time to sit inside without feeling like crap for doing so. Yes, more time to get good.
I don't know. We don't really have an end date on ours, but eventually we get a third hour to go for exercise. So that's exciting coming up. Look at that, milestones in time.
Yeah, I mean, I think ours is, it's like, we might end it in a month, but also maybe not. But we might end it sooner, but we might also extend it out by another month. But it might end in a month, but it could be before that, but it might actually be after that. So we'll let you know.
That's the Victorian model. So.
I mean, that's everywhere at the moment.
Except for Sydney, where people are just screaming and there's fire.
Classic. And then you've got New Zealand where, sorry New Zealand, if anyone's from New Zealand listening, we kind of gave you this Delta strain, so my bad. How bad?
I don't claim this I moved out of New South Wales fair and square at exactly the right time.
Hey, I'm not in New South Wales, technically. Technically. Yeah. So, anyway, moving on from COVID political stuff, how has your art journey been going, Kris?
It's sort of circuitously. I think I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but instead of working in the work, I've been taking the opportunity, because I'd sort of stalled out a bit and I was feeling a bit lost, to work on the act of working, if that makes sense, to sort of put everything in a row and account for everything. And I finished that process up pretty shortly after the last time we recorded. And since then, it's been a matter of looking at all that data that I put out there and just being what do I actually want to do? What has been working? What has the greatest, chance of success with the resources I have, and just trying to be really radically accountable for that. And a couple of decisions come to, for instance, I was working on a couple of projects at the same time, and I've linearized them in that I've, instead of quitting some to work on the others, I've sort of put them behind each other, so I finish one and then finish the other, and then don't have to think about the second until I finish the first.
Yeah. And so
which might swap eventually, but...
Yeah. And so I guess that probably leads into our actual topic of what we're going to be talking today, which is the struggle bus, crashing the struggle bus, or how to crash the struggle bus.
Or driving the struggle bus and deciding whether to take the exit or crash it. What's that meme with the sign on it where it's like, take a hard right-hand turn?
Skirt!
Struggle!
Yeah, so we don't really have an official title for this topic yet. It'll probably be something related to the Jenga bus coming for you, except it's the struggle bus. But the topic that we're generally looking at today is how to figure out when you should just shelve a project or if you should keep going and grinding out at it.
Yeah. Nothing but net on the too hard basket.
Yeah, it's like, okay, is that the too hard basket or is that the stay on the struggle basket?
Lizard brain doesn't want to wake up today.
Yeah. So, Kris, how have you been dealing with this lately?
A lot of it, like I mentioned, it's radical accountability. I don't know what people want to hear from us generally, but I think when we're documenting the process around getting better at art in general as well as CG art, there is, what tools do you use? What is your process? What is your workflow? That sort of thing that we do talk about. But a lot of what I find is an improvement is figuring out the mindset and, figuring out yourself and how you're going to approach the work. Because if you don't know how you're going to approach the work, you can't make decisions about the work. So I think the defining factor for me in choosing whether or not I don't want to do something anymore because it's hard and it's taking too long, or I don't want to do anything more because it doesn't align with my goals. Well, A, you have to have goals to know whether it aligns with them or not. And B, I think any sort of struggle, if it's true struggle, I would make a differentiation between a problem to solve and struggle. And I think when you're facing struggle, one of two things has happened. Either the project is too big for you to feel confident about it through to the end, or the project itself hasn't been defined well enough for you to believe that putting the effort in is worth it.
Yeah, I have definitely gone through that struggle very much recently, and I think I've found a pretty good way for me to overcome that. Before I go into that, have you got any more to say on that, on your side?
Well, I was going to say that the way it approached for me recently, since I've been doing all of this project accountability stuff and sort of getting it out there in front of me, like a jigsaw puzzle, and just figuring out how it all works. I think for practice, I just generally need shorter projects because I've got the attention span of a goldfish. And I just need to make sure that when I'm planning things, though I'm attracted to longer projects, I just need to be really harsh with myself and just say, no.
You like?
Finish something small.
Okay,
and then finish something else small. And then what I tend to do is that as I finish the small thing, then I do something slightly bigger and slightly bigger. And then eventually I get to a point where the size of the project is too much for me personally to even cognitively sort of hold in my head. And then that's when I start to struggle. So I really need to be harsh with myself and keep the project small and rapid. Keep the quick wins coming. You
see, I don't think you like doing big projects. I think you just like planning out big projects and then going, just like clapping your hands like, yeah. All right, well, time to kick it up.
All that would actually happen if I went through and made it was that it would be worse than I imagined it. And I'm imagining it perfect, so I don't see what the problem is here.
And as a result, it is
Pause for psychiatrist. Pause for universal psychiatrist facepalm.
It is 5 years after graduation or whenever. Still getting good.
Hey, I do things.
Don't worry, you and I, same boat, buddy. Same boat.
I think honestly, my skill set is better served to pre-production anyway. You got to be honest with these things. I think a bit of visual development and a bit of production planning, that's a skill in itself.
Yeah, and it's never the one that's hiring.
Never.
It's always the jobs that are always in plenty are the technical nitty gritty, where it's like no one really loves to do this except for a few people that really just.
Well, that's an industry thing as well, isn't it? Because it's they get all of the people who they know they can take advantage of because they're still eager, they make them pay dues, as it were, until they can't anymore, and then they have to promote them.
But, a lot of those jobs that I was just talking about are like a lot of the ones that are just going to get automated into the ground, or at least partially automated.
So what you're saying is that I'm playing the long game, and I'm actually right.
Maybe.
I don't know. What a long game is, right?
You might have to pay your dues before then, so...
I don't like paying dues. I like skipping queues. Respect the rhymes.
Or pay the time. Well, we are incredibly white.
Punchy today,
yeah. Yeah, I think we're just coming in a bit white there. Anyway.
For listeners of the podcast, my skin is translucent.
In case you couldn't tell by his sense of humour.
Okay, that's it. I'm going to be talking like this for the rest of the podcast. You're welcome.
Please don't. So, yeah, I've been in a similar boat to you, Kris, where I was working on a boat project. It was like a small environment of a stylized night elf boat, and I think I was being a bit too obsessive on it, where I wanted to have a really good polished portfolio piece, which was fine to do, but I just think scope-wise it was a little bit too much for me to handle, and so I'm just trying to pull back, and I think I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in the last podcast, that I'm trying to do things in a different gear, where instead of doing a long haul project until it eventually finishes, I'm giving myself 3 days to do a small prop. So the first day typically would be concepting, second day would be modeling, third day would be texturing. And, if the first 2 days fall into the first day, then that's great. So it's just like 2 days of texturing. And so the basic idea of doing this is just really refining the process and refining the pipeline, just so that once that pipeline has become cemented as it's like a instinct almost, and once I've got the instinct of painting a bunch of different types of textures, once I've got that all down pat, then the time that it takes me to do these and get it to a nice finished polished level will start to get quicker and quicker, and then I can branch out and do bigger things from there. So at first it's like the things they're going to be turning out a bit scrappy, but the idea of that is just to get the process down as like second nature pretty much, or instinct, because I had that moment where I was like, I can't stare at this boat anymore. I can't do it.
Yeah, you had the artist equivalent of TV burn-in.
Yeah, it's just that the boat was burnt onto my eyes. Like, I was, I've learned a lot about painting wood. Painting wood has always been like my thing. A lot of hand-painted artists, there's always one texture where it's just like they really like to paint it. It's kind of like their thing. Mine is wood. For some reason,
I always liked
love it.
Grass and ground stuff when I was doing it. I always like to do like shaly ground and things like that.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna give metal a try eventually.
Yeah.
I
always find metal is just rock with an estropy.
Yeah, I'm not really good at painting those types of materials just yet. So I think I'm doing like a fantasy sort of mug kind of thing. So I'm going to do that mug. Hopefully it's somewhat good. And it's got like wood and metal on it. And so, we'll see how it looks. And then I think I'll focus more into metals for a little while. And then I don't know, maybe go to rocks or something like that. And I'll just keep doing these small projects until the pipeline is good. And I've got like a good taste of different materials.
It's similar to what I was doing. My process is pretty solid now, though, because since I did all of those workshops earlier in the year, I've sort of been able to contextualize like where the beginning is, where the end is, and what needs to be done not only to get it from point A to point B, but also what tends to make it better by the time you get there and what makes it easier. That's never really been my problem. My problem is once I understand where it's going, just sitting down, butt on seat, hand on tools, getting it from point A to point B. And that's, for me, that's the struggle bus. That's when you have to get out and push. Like,
yeah,
much easier when it's a shorter project. Because, like, for instance, the one that I was working on, like, I'm not abandoning it, but I am shelving it. And that comes down to today's topic, when to shelve a project and when to keep pushing. Like your boat, I'm going to shelve this one because it was a full acting dialogue scene, which I did want. I wanted a full acting dialogue scene, which is something that I haven't had on my portfolio for some time. But I just don't think I have the muscle memory and the habit in place to take that through. Theoretically, it's fine. I'd done all the planning and I was sort of ready to pull the trigger. But because I'd put a lot of work into the planning, I sort of didn't want to go off half-cocked with it.
Yeah. I think the really good thing about doing short projects for self-improvement is that, first of all, you can churn out a lot of things. And what you can do is you can do a project and say, okay, I'm going to, do it, the whole thing. But my main focus is going to be learning, this. So, not only learning the pipeline, but also I'm going to focus on learning, painting metals, or for you, it could be, I don't know, ear wiggling animations or something like that.
Well, in that case, it was animating to dialogue. But because I do also, like, it got into this situation where the conventional wisdom is you have to be a good animator to be a good animator, which means you have to have, creature shots, and you have to have body mechanic shots, and you have to have dialogue shots. But then also to do the job as a game animator, you have to have a bunch of implemented game animation sets, but that's not actually what they're necessarily looking for on your portfolio. So that really confused me for a while there. Like, I wasn't sure what was worth focusing on, whether to be, a fully rounded, capable animator, or whether to be the world's best game animator. And that duality was what I was really trying to, like, dial in and figure out what I actually wanted.
So, Kris.
Yeah.
For our good listeners listening, how would you say, when is a good time to shelve something? If someone asks you, like, I'm really struggling, I don't know if I should continue this or keep going, like, what's something for them?
Do you know... Well, I think you do, because we mentioned it on the podcast before, the book Eat That Frog?
Yes, I haven't read it, but I'm vaguely familiar with it.
The main conceit is there's something you're avoiding, which is the hard thing, which if you just do it now, will get it out of the way, and then you can work on other stuff. And so you're supposed to wake up in the morning and eat a frog, because it's the hardest thing you're going to do that day, and then everything afterwards is easy.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing. That's kind of goes into the line of what I've been talking about, doing, like, just an hour in the morning.
Yeah, and so I think the time to shelve a project is when you know you need to eat that frog, when you're trying to eat that frog, and when you just kind of get it down. Right,
and so would you say at that point, when you're trying to do something, you just can't get it done, and it's just taken you, you've put deadlines in place and you're just blowing past those deadlines, would you say, all right, time to step back, time to reassess and, perhaps reduce the scope?
I wouldn't I wouldn't necessarily, as a first instinct, shelve it, but it's definitely time to have a look at the project itself and figure out if there's something that's a friction point that doesn't need to be there. Like, maybe you can, like you say, take the scope back a little, or deciding that you've gotten as much out of that exercise as you're going to get out of it, and that you don't need to complete it. That's a good way to conclude a project, and that's not necessarily shelving it. And the closure you get from saying, I'm not going to work on this anymore, can be helpful.
It's liberating.
But liberating.
When I just said, F this to that boat, I was like, I'm free. I can work on anything. And when I realized that, if one of these props isn't working out, well, it's not fine. Like the only intention is to, at this point, learn the pipeline. So if it comes out looking like crap, it's like, oh, whatever, I'll just start a new one tomorrow, or whenever the 3 days is up.
Yeah, and I think that also feeds into the difference between a theoretical pipeline and an actual manageable workflow. Because we did talk about this a little bit last week, but the main problem I think I run into, and that I can imagine other people run into, and to some extent I did see this with my students when I was teaching at the university, when they did get to a certain level of project, there is a pipeline that is, this is how you do it if you're working with people, and so it's good to practice this. But then there's also, are you actually going to do it if you have to do it that way? Because I think fun in a project is an underrated thing.
Yeah, fun. Did you say fun in a project?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, none of us would be doing this if it wasn't fun.
To some extent. Like, if you weren't getting anything out of it, you wouldn't do it. And I think what can happen is people go into it with that intention. They're like, because it's fun, and because I think it's bad that it's fun, because I'm supposed to be taking it seriously for work, I should have a proper, serious, big boy approach to it.
Yeah.
I need to take it seriously. And as soon as you do that, then you start saying, okay, so this has to happen, then this has to happen, then this has to happen. And then there's a friction point or a bit you like to avoid, but you can't get around it. And, you should be doing it, but then you really don't want to.
Yeah, it's when you're doing it for fun, you're not really setting specific goals to take you forward in life. Like it might be doing art if you want to be an artist and you're doing it for fun mostly. It is going to take you forward, but if you don't define goals and figure out where your friction points are and what might be holding you back, then...
And I also think that that's possibly... It's possibly easier advice for some people to take than others. And I think the reason that it sounds like a revelation coming from me is because I don't really do that. Like, for some people, it's like a no-brainer. It's like, well, duh. Of course it's supposed to be fun. Or like, I wake up and I live and I breathe this stuff. I just do what I do. And then because of the volume of what I do, I both get better and get eyeballs on it. But that's not how I naturally work. For me, it's all about like positioning and plans and goal setting and lists.
Yeah, I've got a friend.
And I find that I can end up sort of tying it up a bit. It's sort of like emotional red tape at that point. And it turns more into like project bureaucracy than it does into something that you're actually proud of.
Yeah. I've got one of my friends, he's also down in Melbourne, and he does spit paints almost daily. And it's a part of a goal, and where he wanted to have 100 spit paints done, I think, this year, and he recently surpassed that. And he's been doing spit paints for longer than just 100 spit paints. He's been doing quite a lot for a long time now. And he's mostly just been doing it out of fun. But there is the general goal of he wants to make money out of art somehow eventually, and he just had that goal of 100 spit paints. But he's mostly just doing it out of fun, and he's the sort of person where he can just kind of take it forwards. And I think the thing with the spit paints for him is that it has allowed him to focus down on parts of his process where he can say, okay, well, this isn't going to be a nice rendered piece. It's just going to be something where I can say, I want to learn, composition out of this or whatever. And, bang, you do that 20 times or, say 5 times, and you are exponentially better at, that one particular thing in painting than you were before.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I've used this analogy on the podcast before, but there's that study where they got a bunch of pottery students, and they told one group of pottery students to make as many pots as they could within a time period, and they got another group to all focus on the one pot and just make the absolute best pot they possibly could. And in the end of the day, the last pot made by the quantity group was of a better quality than the quality part by the quality group.
You can get obsessive. You know, there's always that debate of quantity versus quality. And as much as I love going into quality, if you don't go into quantity sometimes, you miss out on chances of experimentation.
And I think that's the key. I think sometimes you forget when you're going into quality. Because, like, you know, that whole beginner mistake where they go into details too fast and they don't work on the main forms?
Yeah. Yeah, like beginner sculpts where they've got skin details in them, but
it's a sphere and it has fully textured eyebrows because it's supposed to be a face, but it's still just a sphere with eyes on it.
Yeah, look, we've all been there.
Yeah, like, I'm not saying it's bad or wrong or anything, but that's like I think that's the same impulse that applies to project setting. It's like you get drawn into quality, whereas what you really should be doing is holding yourself in quantity. And that's something that I fight with a lot. And I think when you get drawn into quality, your expectations for the quality balloon out. And I think there's a point where the horse is kind of bolted and you're not really going to get the project scope back because your idea of what the project will be and your taste for that project is so much higher than your ability to bring it there, that I think that's when you need to sort of put it in the fridge to chill a little, you know, like, because I feel like at that point you need to have forgotten some of the things you wanted it to be.
Yeah,
you must have to like diminish your fervor for that project a little bit more so that when you come back to it, you're less precious with it.
Oh yeah, totally. You're just making me think of this boat project over and over again, of just how much time I wasted when realistically, the thing is, I never would have learnt this if I hadn't have gone through this process. So overall, it's a valuable experience. But I just, the whole time then, I was just thinking about like, damn, I feel like I've wasted so much time plugging out on that boat. Like, I feel like I've learnt a lot in terms of texturing and like good polishing processes and all that sort of stuff. But damn, I spent a lot of time on that. And I don't know how worth it was.
Yeah, right there with you, because like the realization I had because my overall project was the showreel that I'm working on, but through this process that I've just put myself through in accounting for all the things that I was doing, I've realized that I can't really sit down to make a showreel because it's making a product for a client that doesn't exist. You're supposed to give yourself clients. Obviously, you can't, always have a client to be getting that quality of work. But what I realized that by setting out to have quality pieces to go in the showreel, I was slowing myself down because I wasn't practicing and I wasn't polishing. I was trying to do them both at the same time.
Yeah.
And so by separating out the practice and then the polish, that's what's going to actually get me there faster. It feels counterintuitive because then I have to be doing different things.
I think...
But I just don't think it's possible to sit down with the intent to make your best work.
I think that what I'm realizing just now is a good way to consider, learning is to learn the broad strokes first. So learn, the broad stroke of the pipeline of like you start in this, then you go to that, and you go to that, and you go to that, and you just practice that pipeline. And, as you go, you just learn like all the things that are just, the broader things that, is going to be consistent over. Maybe it's artistic choices or it's methods, technical methods or whatever. And then as you go, that broad stroke gets finer and finer and finer until, you've practiced, the pipeline, you've practiced getting fast, you've practiced all those other bigger things. And now you're practicing, doing all of that plus, going and zooming in and, painting in like really small details. And so I think that's probably the value in that. And that once you get to that point, that's when you can start saying, okay, time to do my best piece.
Yeah. But I think your best piece will be drawn from the best work you've done in the other mindset as you get better and as your projects get more ambitious. If that makes sense?
Yeah.
I feel like you don't sit down to make your best work. I feel like by following that repetition of process and making things easier to get further, faster, eventually you get into a territory from that quantity you're pulling out quality as your best work. And I feel like sitting down to make your best work is actually a fool's errand. Definitely one that I've been focusing on, but that's sort of one of the things that I've come to realize is not something that I should be focusing on. And so practically what that means is that I've separated the two, and now I do animation exercises to practice animating. But then I also have a project that I'm working on, and in both of those things I'm trying to preserve the fun a little bit more, because that's what was slowing me down before as well.
You just
if you
weren't
make
having
it
fun.
cut and dry, sorry?
You just weren't having fun.
Yeah, if you make it too cut and dry, if you just follow that process over and over again, you learn very quickly what you need to do more of, and you start steering towards that. But very quickly what it becomes is just a list of things that you're bad at. And so it's like, Clockwork Orange, where they've got the clamps on the eyes and they're holding the eyes open, and he has to watch the movie.
Yep.
And he can't turn away. It's sort of like that, but for all of your worst, qualities. And so what you're doing is you're forcing yourself to turn up every day, stare down the barrel of your own incompetence, and then prove it. If there isn't fun involved in the process, you're not going to come back and do that every day.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm finding that's right. I'm finding these smaller projects to be a lot funner, even though a lot of them are very scrappy and unfinished. I'm having more fun with it, and I'm getting more, sense of satisfaction out of it as well. It's just...
And for me, what that represented was what I was doing. I was stripping away a lot of the other elements of CG art. I was trying to very, very linearly focus on character animation, where I would have a model and a rig supplied by somebody else. I would have, if it was a dialogue shot, I would have the sounds provided by somebody else. I would take away all of the other elements, possibly with the exception of the rendering, which I think is why that was so distracting to me, because it was a creative enterprise apart from the thing I was supposed to be focused on. But by stripping all of those things out, yes, you do get to target the skill that you're trying to work on. But if you then also make that a month-long enterprise that you have to then keep showing up to with no deviation, it gets boring.
Yeah, I think...
Because it's not what you're in that for. You want to do your bit, but you also want to see a whole thing at the end. You don't want to just feel like you're doing reps, like at the gym. You want to feel like you're creating something of note.
Yeah, and I think, sort of going back on what you said just before, is that when you try and do one big project and you try to do your best work, you're trying to do one big win all at once. And you're staking a lot on that, so it just keeps going on ballooning. But at these earlier stages, what the best thing to do is to scale things back. Instead of trying to get one big gigantic win, you scale it back and just get a bunch of little wins. And then, after...
It's like one of those pictures where you've got all the photos, but then you zoom out and it creates another image out of the different sort of colors.
Yeah, more or less. Like you just scale it down to get a bunch of small wins, and after 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, those small wins have stacked up to be a bigger win than that original big win that you wanted, and you've gotten so much more satisfaction out of it.
Do you know what the most frustrating part of that is?
What?
I already knew that. I just forgot. And that's what I'm getting at. I think that's the point. I think a lot of the time when you get into the weeds on these things, it's very easy to forget where you started and where you're going and what you need to do in the middle.
I think...
Because if you've forgotten the start and you've forgotten the end, you don't know where you are in relation to anything.
Yeah.
And it's hard to tell what you've actually done wrong.
And I think that's probably this is probably the value for us in doing these podcasts, because that was something I hadn't thought about until I actually went to speak about this whole topic. And it's I could write it down, and that's how I could figure things out. But I think that's the value in not only that you and I get from this podcast, but I think it's probably the value that our listeners can get from it, so that we can make these mistakes and these revelations and then sort of pass that on to them, and they can go, cool, we don't need to beat that dead fish or beat that horse for
don't make our mistakes.
Yes,
it's like it's the shortcut to don't make the same mistakes twice. It's let somebody else make that mistake for you.
Yes. Okay, everybody listening. Okay, here's the deal. Right, you're all listening. Cool. All right, we've made these mistakes. Don't make them. If you're a beginning,
An Oral History of Getting Good.
An Oral History of Getting Good by Kris and Jayden. Don't make our mistakes.
This is Audible.
Yeah, but if you're a beginning artist and you're trying to figure out, or maybe you're already a good artist and you're trying to shift laterally from, say, I don't know, environment art to character sculpting.
I think we've got an even split from the engagement we've got, and I think we've got intermediate guys and girls coming up, and we've got some people who are coming from something else and trying to move into something else. And for all intents and purposes, I'm pretty sure that's the same person, just from a different perspective. I know, guys. If you want us to include you in these sweeping generalizations, please like, comment, and subscribe so that we know who our listeners are. We do like to bring that into the podcast because we like to know who we're actually talking to. Helps us sort of moderate the content. So if you're a beginner coming up and you're finding this useful, let us know as well, because I think we are more in that intermediate era where you're in that muddy middle and nobody really knows what they're doing and everybody's just grasping at straws.
All right, so should we do like a little bit of a conclusion before we wrap up? Sort of tie a little nice bow around it?
Well, I suppose the original question was, how do you know when to keep driving the struggle bus into the desert?
Yep.
And when to sort of just call the rescue helicopter?
Yep.
And I think at the end of the day, the point is that if you can't remember where you were coming from, and you don't know where you're going, and all you've got is the thing that you're at the moment that you're holding onto very tightly, I think that's time to shelve it.
Yeah.
Because at that point, you've got too much of yourself pushed into this one thing. It might get there eventually, but it's going to get there so slow that if you'd just done 9 other projects in the meantime, you would have gotten to that quality level and had all of that other experience as well.
Yeah, and at that point, you just got to ask yourself, is this worth it? Is trying to go after this big win, and like, is this a big win that I'm trying to go for? And is it too much for me to handle? Is it worth it? Should I just scale back and try to get a bunch of small wins that will equal out to, an equally as big win or even bigger?
And as a small aside, I think environmental factors can influence that as well. Because, for instance, if you're paying for your software on a subscription basis, you might feel worse about throwing away work than you would otherwise. Because you might be able to actually calculate some of the resources that you're giving up by doing that. But that's sunk cost fallacy. Yeah,
and I think that other environmental factors, or less environmental, more sort of, lifestyle or families, if you've got a family, then, time, those smaller wins, way more valuable, because if you've got 3 kids, it's going to be way harder to do some big, ambitious project, especially, not exclusive, but especially if you're a beginner artist. If you break those down to be something smaller, then, you can pump these things out and you can get those wins faster, between, your kids doing whatever it is that children do, apparently.
There's a guy I've been following called Sterling Reams. He's, I don't really know what to describe him as. I wouldn't call him an influencer so much as like a industry speaker on topics on social media. He says, do you call it a conversation if he replies to a comment of yours?
An interaction, I'd say.
An interaction. I had an interaction the other day, and it was a really interesting one because his whole point was that he thinks that the internet and the way it's set up right now and social media is very distracting, and that you're supposed to be a sole producer rather than consumer. And I'm sorry if I'm paraphrasing that against and putting words into his mouth, but that was the vibe that I got from this post that he made. And I said, well, that's an interesting thought, because it got me thinking about a lot of this stuff that we've been talking about today. But what do you think about the quick wins? What do you think about when you need that little bump of dopamine, like when you need to post something there and have an interaction? And for me specifically, this came from a point where I had done a quick sketch. It had taken me about maybe 12 minutes. It came out pretty well. I put it on Instagram. It got more interaction than some of the animations that have taken me a month and a half. Right?
It's always those ones.
Yeah, it's never a good place to be. And even like my wife wanted to keep it, like it's one of those things that took you very little effort and then it gets a lot of engagement.
Was that the sketch of the flowers that you put up?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was 12 minutes?
Yeah, something like that. 12 to, let's say, quarter of an hour to 20 minutes.
Looks like an all-day job, but okay.
Well, thank you for that. But the main point was, and he came back and he was like, yeah, like I've done some basic simulation stuff in Blender, and that's had more interaction on social media than anything else that he's done. He's a pretty prolific animator. The main point was that if you're a beginner, he thinks you should be quiet and you should be working. Like, you should be head down. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be producing quickly. It just means that you shouldn't be producing performatively, because there's only two things that performance get you. It gets you eyeballs, and it gets you, spectacle, which is pretty much why everybody's there in the first place. But it also gets you feedback. When you're a beginner, you kind of don't need the feedback. You just need the reps. Yeah. You just need to go to the gym, pump out some dumbbells. You need a teacher. You need to be taking in information, but you don't need people to be like, oh, the eye here, you could can it up a little bit because it looks a bit more like it would be, this kind of thing if it was up this way. Like, you can't get that kind of detailed information from a critique when you're a beginner, because the advice you're going to get is going to be more like, hey, maybe try basic shapes before sculpting the face. It's going to be general stuff like that. And you don't need to be on social media to get that. There's much better ways to get that. Yeah, and you see, I've seen beginner artists trying to push their social media before. And, they'll be pushing hard, but they've got 2 followers. And it's just because, this definitely isn't a dump on beginner artists. It's just because they're at such a beginning phase where it's like, the feedback, as you said, it's always going to be the same, where it's like, practice shapes before you do faces or whatever. Let me push back on that a little bit, because I'm a terrible artist on social media. Me too. I'm probably at the level that you're, critiquing there in a lot of cases. Maybe a little bit more advanced. Like, comment, and subscribe, because, hey guys, I need it. But I'm a terrible social media artist, because I don't see people in that regard as my audience so much. I see people for the podcast as my audience, but when I'm just making art, I'm making art because I want to make art. I've never been able to transition that into knowing who it's really for, and that's sort of the process that I'm working on. But that's more of an intermediate problem to have. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's not so much about the fact that you are trying to build your social media. It's the where you are when you're trying to do that. Like, there will be beginners that have 1,000 more followers than I do, but it's still beginner art. And I would say that the over-under on them spending, several, tens of hundreds of hours of quiet work before coming back and doing anything with that would be a lot greater the earlier they are in their career. Like, because the more your art gets to a particular point, the more you get into that muddy middle, and then you do need to scream for attention. But until you're there, you really shouldn't be like blasting the foghorn, because then if you do get eyeballs, they're just going to roll off. And worse, they might remember that next time.
I don't think that they'll remember it. That they might remember it, but I think it's mostly forgivable. But yeah, I think it will be sort of rolled off, and if you do get a reply, it'll be like, practice shapes.
It definitely works that way with recruiters. If you send a portfolio into a recruiter, 9 times out of 10 they'll keep it. Not because they're considering employing you, but because when you reapply in 4 years, they want to see if you've grown.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it, because I suppose some people will remember it in terms of, how much you've grown. And, that can be the value that some artists or some people will follow, more beginner/intermediate artists and watch them grow. But I don't think anyone's really going to follow absolute beginners unless they can kind of see like some growth and some pattern and progression there.
Yeah. And I think there's a certain, like a gene or something that people have where they might be a bit more of an instructor at their heart, and they kind of like that vibe, so that you will get people doing that. But to sort of circle back around to the point that I meant when I brought this up, that the interaction I had with this guy on social media was, it's pretty much the difference between knowing when to get quiet and execute and when to talk about it. And I feel like the more quick wins you have, the more you can balance that. And I feel like when you're in that muddy middle, being able to balance a bit of attention with still getting your skills under control is important. And so not being a consumer in that you're sitting on Twitter scrolling, but being present in those spaces, it does become a little bit more important.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. Yeah, I think that...
Because I feel like that also helps you overcome some of the struggles if you do get feedback. Because if you do the same thing over and over and over and over and you can't figure out what it is, or you don't even know where to start looking for the thing that you think is a problem, that you know is a problem emotionally, but you can't see it.
Mm.
It's really helpful to have trusted people coming back at you with that. And I think that's a gradient, right? When you're a beginner, you don't need those eyeballs, you just need to work. When you're in the middle, you do need those eyeballs, but they need to be trusted eyeballs that are interested in what you're doing already, so that you can actually get proper feedback. Then as you transition into a more notable personality, that's when you lose control over that, and it's sort of just everybody's there, and it's sort of like public space.
Yeah, and this is coming from two guys who've got 70-something followers on Twitter. Please follow us, we need it.
Probably.
Yeah.
I don't know. Honestly, it's not a metric that I follow very closely.
Yeah.
Because I haven't put a lot of effort into it.
Yeah.
I'm working on setting up some things like my personal YouTube channel and that sort of thing. More to come on that in the future.
Me too.
But because I'm putting some work into that, that's the sort of stuff that I'd be looking at the metrics. And because we're putting a bit of work into this podcast, that's the sort of thing that I would be looking into the metrics and trying to actively grow that. If you're just present in a space, I don't really care. I just want to look professional enough in that space that if I ask a question, it might get answered, That's what I find, most frustrating with those sorts of things. It's like if you ask a question and it doesn't get any responses. It's like, I just want an answer. Because you just don't matter at that point.
It really sucks.
Especially because these algorithms, they put you in this space to make you feel like you're part of that conversation. And especially for me, I listen to a lot of podcasts. And so a lot of the time, my brain tricks me into thinking that I'm sitting at the table there with them. I have a lot of thoughts about what they're talking about. I haven't said anything, but if we were there around the table, I probably wouldn't have said a whole lot either. So the social differentiation there, the parasocial relationship, can trick you into feeling like you're being rejected by your peers, even though you're not really in that space.
Yeah. I've gotten that. Yeah, I've gotten that vibe where, you've listened to the same podcast for, I don't know, like a month. And then after that month, you're just like, all right, yeah, time to go and listen to the pod with the guys. Oh, no, wait, no, that's not it. Oh, no, I don't actually know these people. Oh, God, I'm a loser.
Maybe not that extreme, but it can
I was exaggerating, but yes.
Yeah, it can get to that point, and it is I think that accounts for a lot of the depression and anxiety that a lot of people have in these spaces, because they want that kind of conversation in their local space, but all the people around them are just talking about the latest sports ball game, and they don't give a crap about composition, light and color.
Yeah, I mean, when people are talking about sports ball, that's when I glaze over.
Yeah, and that's what the internet's good for. It does put you in these spaces, but you do need to put yourself in there and make yourself available, because otherwise nobody knows you're actually there. You feel like they should because you know you're there, but they don't. And so that would be an excellent point to just say, guys, don't be parasocial. Talk to us. We're available. You can email us, krisandjayden@gmail.com.
Or leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and just let us know what you think. Interact with us. We're always looking to, get to know our audience.
Otherwise, it's just going to be more of us rambling about our personal circumstances, and as fun as that is, we would very much like to sort of direct this more towards a broader sense of universal
people
growth. Yeah.
All right. So, Kris, where can they find you on socials?
They can follow me on Twitter at animatorkris.
And you can find me on Twitter at JSTO_art, or on Instagram at Jayden.Rai, RAI. See ya.
Bye. I'm going forward in my head, imagining that this episode is called Driving the Struggle Bus. So that's what it's going to be called on the title card. You can clickbait that up as much as you want.
The struggle bus is coming.
I'm like this close to making that a YouTube channel.
The struggle bus.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Struggle Bus, where I, Kris, drive the struggle bus.
We like to struggle, we like to struggle.
In a ditch? No way!